Okay, very happy to be joined today by the voice of Cage Warriors, Brad Wharton, as we are just days away from Cage Warriors 192. Goes down this Saturday, 12th of July, at the Indigo in London. Of course, if you're not there, UFC Fight Pass is where you can watch big flyweight title on the line in the main event. Um, yeah, Brad, busy few weeks for Cage Warriors. Obviously, we saw the two cards in Manchester just a couple of weeks ago. Now on to London. How have you been? Lots of preparation, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's been the summer series I've called it the summer series. I don't know if that was supposed to be an official thing, but that's what I've been going by. We had a cool event in Italy, very end of May. Obviously Manchester in June, and we finish off the summer series in July this weekend. It's going to be probably the hottest day of the year. I think it's looking like 31 on Friday, so fitting that we shall be turning up the heat in the cage as well.
Yeah, like you say, the end of the summer series. I was looking earlier. There's nothing till September after this one, so ready to go out with a bang because it's going to be a few weeks for no Cage Warriors. I've talked to commentators before, and it always varies slightly. So, what does your prep look like? I know obviously you do a couple of jobs in Cage Warriors as well, so maybe you can't dedicate all of your time to that. But what does a normal fight week look like for Brad Wharton?
It honestly varies with what's going on. I went through a phase a few years ago of handwriting pages and pages of notes, and I found that if I actually physically wrote it out by hand, it would stick in my head better. And then I forgot my notebook one day and just realized that it was kind of all up there anyway. So I was kind of maybe panicking over nothing. I think I'm sort of at a stage now, and it does help working full time for Cage Warriors because I'm doing, I'm writing about fights, I'm writing previews, I'm talking to media constantly about the fights and the fighters, and we're obviously discussing things a lot in the office. It's not like I'm kind of just going in blind to stuff. So I think a lot of the sort of quote unquote prep is already done. I do like to sit there down, especially I'm not really a stats guy, so if there's any kind of stat that I want to definitely get in there, I'll write that down. Um, but through the process of preparing information for the broadcast, preparing information to be sent out to media, it kind of all just sinks in. So I don't tend to worry too much these days about sitting in front of tape study and writing down a million and one little things. Yeah, I guess I've just been doing it long enough now that it just kind of sticks.
Well, that's good. That's definitely handy, especially when you're balancing lots of plates, including breaking up a fight. We saw we saw in Manchester just a couple of weeks ago. We saw that chaos, and I do want to talk about that. We saw the video at the weigh-in, Giordano's coach, the melee that ensued, and who pops up to break up the fight but a certain Mr. Brad Wharton. What's your thoughts in that moment?
Well, obviously, I'm probably the least dangerous person in the entirety of European mixed martial arts. So I thought, why not? Let's get right in the thick of it. No, look, it was obviously a crazy situation, and we're obviously all stood around at the weigh-ins, and when something like that happens, obviously, what you're trying to do is get as many bodies between the two people as possible, because what you don't want is one fighter hitting another and then the fight is off. If someone gets hurt, the fight is off. Um, so I think all of us kind of just piled in there and just kind of did the done thing. As much as I'd like to take credit for you know marshalling the situation, being the Cage Warriors enforcer, that is not the case at all. Well, look, yeah, what a mad
No.
situation. I don't. I've
Yeah.
obviously I've seen fighters, pushing and shoving at the weigh-ins, kind of part and parcel of the game. I've seen fighters go for each other before. I don't think I've ever seen a coach whack a fighter. Certainly not a Cage Warriors. So yeah, look, even after the best part of 20 years of being around MMA, there's always something new going to happen. Unfortunately, that led to a fight we were all looking forward to being cancelled, which was a real shame. That's the real shame of it all, really. But look, what can you do? It's a crazy, ridiculous sport, and these are the things that happen sometimes.
Yeah, we'll move on to 192 in a second, but do you see a world where Giordano fights in Cage Warriors again? He said like he's not going to. His coach has been banned. Do you see a world where that can be kind of fixed or no?
Look, I'll say this about a lot of things in MMA. When people say, "I'll never do this ever again," or "You can't do this ever again," or "This will definitely never happen," don't believe it. You know, there's always a way. If there's a reason for it to happen and a good reason for it to happen, people will find a way. And I
Yeah,
think, you know, with a sport like MMA, especially in this part of the world where we effectively govern ourselves, we have a bit more leeway to use a bit of common sense. And if an understanding can be reached, then and there's a good reason for it to be reached, then absolutely that can happen. In this particular case, I don't know. Obviously, you know, things have been said. He's kind of made it clear that he doesn't want to fight for Cage Warriors anymore. If that's the case, I guess he'll just wait out his contract, or they'll come to terms on a release, or whatever they do. That's, you know, that's above my pay grade. I only get to deal with the fun stuff, so I should leave that to them. What I will say is that it will be a shame. It's a shame we didn't get to see that fight, and it'll be a shame if we don't see Giordano in the Cage Warriors cage again.
it was a strange card though. A lot of underdog wins, a lot of fights where the guy with the name value coming into the fight ended up losing. I think it goes to show the strength of the roster that's been built over the last few weeks or over the last few months. Because we see these new signing posts very regularly now, and there's been a lot of turnaround where, you know, a lot of fighters who have fought for Cage Warriors for a long time have left. I'm thinking people like Jordan Vucenic, Morgan Charrier, Paul Hughes. So there's been a bit of a rebuilding phase. Does it feel like that on the inside? And I think events like this in the last few days, or in Manchester rather, it kind of goes to show that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think one of the important things to note about Cage Warriors for anyone who's not familiar with us is we're not out here trying to compete with the UFC. We are the promotion that gives fighters the platform to get to that UFC level. So for 20 plus years, nearly 25 years now, there's a constant rebuilding process going. You're always going to have situations where you've got, you know, loads of stars on the roster, and then a year later, that you're trying to build loads more. But, you know, with all the ebbs and flows, we're always in that process of finding more talent. You know, we had periods where we were just so incredibly fortunate to have, for example, Paul Hughes, Morgan Charrier, Jordan Vucenic, all in the promotion in the same division, fighting each other at the same time. Obviously, that doesn't happen permanently, but it will happen again. There'll be a welterweight division where there's 3 or 4 top contenders. There'll be a bantamweight division where there's 3 or 4 top contenders. And to be honest, bantamweight, not far off that right now. But look, Ian Dean's the mastermind. You know, he's the guy. If he doesn't know it, it's not worth knowing. And he's constantly finding these guys. Torpil Meriev, who we saw fight Teddy Stringer the other week, as soon as Ian Dean put that fight on the table in the Cage Warriors office, he basically just said, "Don't write this guy off. He's really, really good."
Yeah.
Teddy Stringer goes out and does a perfect Teddy Stringer first round, and then this guy just pulls it out of the fire. Incredible scenes, and I'm all for it.
Of course, of course. Obviously, the reason we've got you on though, Cage Warriors 192 this weekend, flyweight title on the line in the main event. Shaj Haq defending against Giovanni Scott. It's a big fight. Shaj hasn't fought in a couple of years. Giovanni's a guy where every time I've seen him, I just think he's such a high level guy, even when he was fighting on the prelims. So I'm excited to see him in this spot, especially those wins against Joe Harris, David Scarano. What's your read on this one? Obviously, without giving too much away, without giving away a prediction.
Big fan of Giovanni for a long time. Back to his amateur days, he fought in Cage Warriors many, many years ago as an amateur,
Yeah.
and you could see he had something pretty special then. And I know everyone at Cage Warriors, you know, myself, Ian, have been hiring him for a long time. He took a bit of time off from MMA, and I remember a few years back, I was out in Cyprus doing a show for some reason with a few of the UK MMA guys, Dan Movaheady and Ricky Wright and a few people. And Giovanni was on the card. There was a few GB Top Team guys on the card, and he making his pro debut. And I was like, "Oh man, this is so cool!" I hadn't seen him for a while, and he sort of said, "You know, really want to get onto Cage Warriors as a pro and go after that belt." And here he is. You know, this is something he's wanted to compete for a long time. I think there's been a pretty fair gap in Cage Warriors between the flyweight champ and the rest of the pack for some time now. You know, you had Sam Creasy beforehand, and you've got Shaj now. So this is the place where the guys are starting to close the gap now. You know, Nicolas LeBlanc was supposed to have a shot at the title. That didn't come to fruition for various reasons. He's kind of still waiting in the wings. But Giovanni has kind of just quietly sat there, racking up wins, looking a little bit better every time. And you keep doing that, and you put on a performance like the one he had against John Matos last time out. All of a sudden, you're fighting for the belt in your own backyard. It's a big, big moment for this young man. He's taking a huge step up against a classy veteran, a guy who just knows how to drag people into his kind of fight, a guy who's fought round after round after round over the years, knows how to get you into that 5-round fight mentality. He drew Michele Martignoni into that, and that's how he beat him. And I think that is what he's going to want to do against Giovanni Scott, make him fight 5 rounds at a pace that he doesn't necessarily want to. Will he be able to do that? Will Giovanni be rolling the dice on the big early finish? Who knows? If you look to the last time Shaj was beat, it was an early finish from Jake Hadley, big power. That may be the key to victory for Giovanni. But either way, it's going to be an incredible fight.
How big of a factor do you think Shadja's layoff could be in this? Obviously, I think Giovanni's fought like 3 times in the last year. It's been a couple of years since we've seen Shadj.
Yeah, I think, especially with a guy of an older guy in the division, and I say this as a man of very advanced years myself. I'm considerably older than Shaj. Everything hurts when you get to a certain age. But joking aside, Shaj is not fought for a couple of years. All those little niggles. Obviously had an injury issue that originally took him out of a flyweight fight earlier last year. But it's all the little niggles, when you're constantly in fight camps, that take their toll over the years. So he's going to have had that time off. All those little niggles are going to have healed up, you would like to think. So, if he was 22 and he'd missed 2 years, I'd be concerned. At this sort of veteran stage of his career, it may even be a bonus for him. Obviously, you're going to have those issues with, is your timing on? A guy like Shaj, that has been his bread and butter over the years. So I'm going to say, regardless of the break, it probably will be. That's one of the best tools of his trade. I think a guy like Shaj is not going to be handicapped by the time off at all. However, you can't buy the experience of being in fights and being in fight camps. And for a young guy like Giovanni, probably coming up to his athletic prime, his physical peak, certainly mentally, he's going to be feeling a lot better about the fact that that guy's been doing whatever for 2 years. I've been the one in here working the hard yards.
Up and down the card, though, high-level names. Obviously, the co-main event, we've got Cameron Else, Sherzad Kadri, some heat between those two. It's the first fight for Sherzad since winning the prize fighter. Oh, unfortunately, didn't get that title fight with Liam. You'd think maybe with a win here, he will get that. But yeah, elsewhere, Jack Humphreys 3-0, Ollie Sawa 6-0, all 6 by KO. Wes Meyer and Aidan Stevens, a great fight. Tyreek Pell, Adam Shelley, which we broke on here the other day. Shelley on short notice. Anthony Orozco 6-0 from the US. For my money, one of the best prospects in the sport. Yusuf Ali Taleb 5-0, making his Cage Warriors debut. Ton more. What are the standout names, fights, storylines for the rest of the card for you?
Well, as you said about the Adam Shelley, Tarek Pell fight that you guys broke, that's cool. Last minute situation. I believe Adam was, there was talk of him maybe stepping in Manchester to fight Manuel Del Valle. That would have been at welterweight, I think, a couple of weeks ago. Unfortunately, that didn't come off, but he's obviously, there waiting for the opportunity, and this opportunity against Tarek came, and they've bitten Cage Warriors' hand off for it. Big fan of Adam, and a big fan of Tarek as well. Have been for some time, and I think this has got the potential to be a real banger. I think it's going to be opening the main card on Saturday, and for me, that's exactly where it needs to be. Whatever's happened with the prelims, maybe a little bit of a break before the main card starts. This is going to be the fight that gets the crowd pumped for the main card. Both guys, great strikers. Tarek's going to be bringing the power. Shelley's going to be bringing the range, those wide arcing kicks and the spinning attacks. I just think this one's got madness written all over it. Really looking forward to it. Ollie Sawa, you mentioned, probably the best nickname in the entirety of mixed martial arts. Sweet and Sawa, absolutely sublime stuff from the young man. But look, when the cage door closes, he's wrecking guys. He's just insane power. A real nasty streak to him. Like once he's got you, you're staying got. He's not letting guys out of these situations. He is finishing fights. He's facing a guy in Damiano Sconia, who, again, undefeated as well, 5-0-1, I think, off the top of my head. A rising talent coming out of Italy. So this is, again, a big step up for Ollie. This is the kind of guy he's going to have to beat if he wants to enter the upper echelons of this division, if he wants to establish himself as a future title challenger. So big moment for him and also for Sconia as well. If he can take this scalp, he takes the momentum and he puts himself in a similar position.
Yeah, I mean, just on that one, I think it's obviously always hard to tell when you've got a guy who's just knocking everyone out left, right, and center. But how close do you think he is to the top of the division? Like,
Yeah, as you say, it's tough to say until maybe you've seen him put through the grinder a little bit. Some guys you don't see that until they get to the title fight because they just bang everyone out. So who knows? You know, if that keeps happening, you know, eventually he's going to get the title shot because his next opponent's going to be a bit tougher, and his next opponent's going to be a bit tougher. And if he keeps putting these guys out in the first or second round, well, he'll probably get a title shot sooner than later. And I think he's what 6-0 now, 8-0 by the end of the year, perhaps. I think early 2026, if he's still looking as good as he is now, if presumably he's not been signed by the UFC, if he's not been tabbed for the Contender Series or something, you have to put him in the conversation. I just can't wait to see how he performs on Saturday against a guy who's going to give him a lot more problems than previous opponents. And then if he gets past that test, you know, then you're looking at putting him in there with, you know, a Wesley Meyer or an Aiden Steen, you know, someone of that ilk taking another step up again. And that's when I think we see the real questions answered.
you mentioned a guy like that getting a fight where they're gonna get put through the grinder. That's what we've got with Anthony Orozco this weekend, haven't we, as well?
Yeah, he's facing a tough dude. Look, if you're knocking around calling yourself the Hands of Stone, there's going to be a reason for that. And I think, you know, we chatted about this over the weekend
Yeah.
on Twitter, didn't we? Like, you know, the guy's got something ridiculous like 12 knockouts to his name. I'm really high on Anthony Orozco. I think he's just tailor made to fight in the UFC. You know, he's a great looking lad. He's physically fit. He's got that athletic background. You know, was one of America's best credentialed amateur MMA fighters before he made the trip to pro. And he's been able to train as part of this MMA Fight Academy in San Diego, where they've had all these guys in from Asia, from Europe, from the US. You know, he's training with guys like Teddy Stringer every day. He's been training full time as a professional, which is the crucial part of it. These guys have been paid to train for this project, and you've seen it come on in leaps and bounds. You know, he had that one fight where it was mostly a stand-up fight, and he struggled a little bit. So I'm thinking that he's maybe going to want to test himself on the feet again against this guy, the Hands of Stone. So look for Orozco to keep it up. He's always one of those guys who's, you know, he probably could take an easy road, but he wants to show you what he can do, what he's learned, and he's learning a lot at the moment. So I'm expecting him to be really going for it this time. You know, the first half of the Contender Series season for this year is pretty much sewn up now. But, you know, you'll see there's not much announced for the second half of it. And we always see a few names added on from guys who are fighting over the summer. I think if Orozco can get a big win here, I wouldn't be shocked at all to see him get the call for the Contender Series.
You mentioned MMA Fight Academy, though. I just want to touch on that because obviously, as someone on the inside of Cage Warriors have been a big part of setting that up. How do you feel that project has gone?
I mean, it seems to have gone pretty well for a lot of the guys. Obviously, you know, an interesting time to be having this conversation because Teddy Stringer's obviously lost the other week, and Big Fran lost the other week. But look, that's part of the game.
Yeah.
You know, these guys are obviously being, you know, they're training together, and they're having all their pro fights on Cage Warriors. You know, you're not going to get an easy ride all the way to the title in Cage Warriors. You're going to have to fight tough guys, but you'll get the right fights at the right time. You know, we're trying to develop these guys. We're not trying to throw these guys to the wolves. We're trying to give them the right fights at the right point in the career to help that development. Unfortunately, sometimes you're going to win those fights and sometimes you're going to lose those fights. But the camaraderie and the teamwork that these guys have been able to build, and you know, you've got guys like Jack the Ripper and Joe Humphreys as well. They've benefited a lot from it, and I think the big benefit, as I sort of touched on with Orozco there just briefly, is the fact that they've been able to train full time. And with the sport the way it is in this part of the world, in most parts of the world, really, having that opportunity to train full time, whether it's for a year or 2 years or I think going on 3 years now for some of these guys, you just can't buy it. You know, not having to worry about going down the gym and doing 50 PTs in a week just to pay the bills, not having to worry about, you know, working in a day job or working in a factory or working on the doors at night and then getting your training around that. There's a benefit not just to the skills you're developing, but also kind of living that fighter's lifestyle. And I think that's something that these guys are going to take away from it, and it's going to set them up. Whatever they do for the remainder of their career, most of these guys got probably over a decade ahead of them in the sport. It's going to be such a great grounding for them, and I think that's probably the biggest benefit that they're going to see.
I spoke to Jimmy Quinn a while ago, and he said they'd done some like filming for a reality show or something out there. Do you know when we might be able to see that?
I do not. So one of the people behind the project is Mola, who are one of our broadcast partners in Asia and Italy. So they've been filming that from day one. So there are camera crews following these guys pretty much everywhere. But whether they're training, whether they're out in San Diego, or whether they're at Cage Warriors events. I believe some of it went out already in Indonesia, maybe. There was originally like a whole wave of Indonesian guys as part of the Fight Academy.
Yeah.
Obviously, Jekka was in the UFC, had that unfortunate big knockout loss recently. So yeah, the truth is, I don't know. But the amount of footage those guys have filmed, you've probably got about 15 seasons worth of the MMA Fight Academy show to look forward to. And look, there's some big characters there. So whatever format it does end up coming out in, I'm sure there'll be a few laughs guaranteed.
Of course, of course. Of course, this is Cage Warriors 192 going down this weekend, which means we are getting towards that magic number 200. Can we expect a special card for this one? And is something that is already in the works?
I would be amazed if there wasn't something special happening. The God's honest truth is, I don't know what the actual plans are. Just looking at the numbering of shows up to the end of this year, it would be the first show of 2026.
Yeah.
And there's obviously going to be something happening. We obviously don't know our dates and locations yet, but I'm hearing things are being said. There are certain whispers going on, and I expect towards the end of this year we'll have made an announcement of what it's going to be, where it's going to be. I mean, who knows? Is it going to be in America? Is it going to be in Vegas? Is it going to be in Ireland? Is it going to be in London? So the weird thing about Cage Warriors, we've kind of got all these little spiritual homes dotted around everywhere. So I think you could probably do it in any number of places. But look, we really went out for UFC 100, Cage Warriors 100 even. We went big for that. That was a big show in the Ice Arena in Cardiff. All sorts of massive fights on that one. So I would be astounded if something special doesn't happen. So yeah, early 2026 is when it will be. As far as like any news on it, I would say keep stay tuned in towards the end of this year, and you'll be hearing something then.
If you had to matchmake though, let's put you in Ian Dean's shoes. Big shoes to fill, I know. What's the Cage Warriors 200 main event?
If we're talking the roster that we have now, I'm gonna say I think probably Harry Hardwick versus Tobias Harilla. If Harilla were to come back, I think that would be that's my kind of main event, and that's just me being a violence pervert, but it's something I'd like to see. I'd have loved to see Harilla versus Cullen, so maybe that'd be a nice co-main event. But I think it'd have to be a Harry Hardwick title fight. If they've asked me earlier this year, it obviously would have been Harry Hardwick, Luke Riley. But Luke Riley no longer with Cage Warriors, unfortunately. Hearing there should be some news about what he's up to next coming out quite soon. But yeah, I'm going to go with Hardwick versus Harilla purely because that's exactly my kind of fight.
Yeah, that's a very fun fight right there. Nailed it.
And if we're not having fun, what's the point, right? It doesn't. I stick your rankings. Who cares? I just want fun.
Yeah, of course. While we're touching on the future here, we already talked earlier about like kind of the rebuilding of the roster. Who are some of the people that maybe haven't quite made that splash in terms of notoriety? Maybe people that are on the prelims that you look at and just think, that's the next guy up. That's the next main eventer. Someone who maybe the public aren't super aware of yet.
I think if you want to look at this Saturday's card, there's a young man called Trevor McKengo fighting. I want to say maybe the second or third fight in. He debuted with us, I want to say in London in March this year, and I was super, super impressed with him. Also, he is barely 20s, 19, 20, I think. So super, super young, got an entire career ahead of him. And I was very, very impressed. So if you are tuning in on UC Fight Pass or you're going to the event, get there early. Keep an eye out for this lad because I think he's got an incredibly long way to go ahead of him. And yeah, super impressive.
Good to hear. Definitely one I'll have on my radar now that maybe wasn't right there before. You mentioned obviously cage warriors have these footholds in different places, a lot of different territories these days. Obviously, London, Manchester, Newcastle, Glasgow, Dublin, Rome, San Diego. That seems to be the loop at the minute. Is there anywhere new that you think cage warriors could be headed in the near future, or anywhere that you would like to see that feels realistic at this point?
I would love to go back to Birmingham. I think there's a really strong roster of fighters from the Midlands at the moment. I think, yeah, in terms of the UK, I think Birmingham would make a lot of sense. Logistically, you need somewhere where it's easy to get fighters to and from. We're flying a lot of these guys. We could be flying maybe 10 guys in from overseas and their coaches and everything. So you need places with hotels that have got the right facilities. You need places near airports or with good transport links. We're flying guys in from Brazil, for example, who these guys are wild, man. They'll turn up. They won't speak a word of English. They'll have about $5 in their pocket, no bank card, and then they'll just kind of ring you and say, "Oh, I'm in England now. How do I get to Manchester?" It's wild. So we've got to put contingencies in place to make sure we can actually get all these dudes in. So a place like Birmingham, I think would be great. More to the point, there's so much talent in the Midlands in this country. We've had some great shows there over the years before. I personally love to go back there. I would have loved to have done France. We nearly got there just pre-pandemic, obviously, when we had Morgan Charrier, but circumstances against us. I'd like to go back to Belgium, or my ideal Cage Warriors event would be in Holland because I grew up there and have a big affinity for the country, and it's got a great combat sports culture, and we've got the Cage Warriors Academy over there. So one day, if we had to go somewhere else in Europe, I think Holland would be fantastic. But as for the US, got to be Vegas at some point, right?
Of course, of course. I live out in the middle of nowhere in Norfolk, so I'm gonna fight for Cage Warriors Norwich. It's probably not gonna happen, but I can dream. Um,
Well, the,
yeah,
the the dream is always having one that you can get home and sleep in your own bed afterwards. That for
yeah,
me, for years, I wanted to work at an M. I was like, bring one to Peterborough or Cambridge or something. Thankfully, I only live about maybe 25 minutes in a cab from the O2. So myself and Dan Motherheady usually share an Uber home, and that feeling of being in your own bed by midnight is chef's kiss.
yeah. There's venues in Norwich. You can put in the word. They can come. It's nice and close to sort of. That's not too far from you either. It's only a couple hours. Um, Obviously, I think the San Diego cards are some that maybe go under the radar with UK fans a lot, obviously because the time they're shown, there's not so many UK cards on there. But what are those cards like for you? Obviously, you've been out there working with Angela Hill, which I'm sure is a good time as well. What have those cards been like for you?
Yeah, I really enjoyed them. So I missed the first few San Diego cards, but I started going when they basically Cage Warriors basically had like a residency at a casino in just outside San Diego, actually about 40 minutes outside San Diego, just in the middle of the mountains. It's absolutely fantastic. Like there's just nothing there for miles around, and then this casino, which like many giant casinos, is just open 24 hours a day. There's no windows. You don't know what time of day it is or what day of the week it is. It's just a bizarre experience. But obviously, like we go out there, I think we get there on the Monday and leave on the Saturday. So it was just a crazy week. Really good in a way because all your fighters are actually there. You're not worrying about guys turning up at the weigh-ins or not turning up at the weigh-ins, or are they going to be late, or are they going to be there for their media stuff? Everyone's at the hotel in the casino, and then the event is at the hotel in the casino. So you're just walking downstairs. You've got the US Commission effectively overseeing the show. So they're running all the backstage, they run all the weigh-ins, takes a massive load off us. You kind of sat there sometimes thinking, am I actually at work now? It's like, do I need to do anything here? Am I supposed to be? Can I just go and play blackjack for half an hour? So yeah, I think the Cage Warriors team really enjoyed them, and yeah, hopefully back out in America next year. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, just before we finish, give us a rundown. What we got coming up for the rest of the year? I know we've got a Newcastle card, I know we've got a Dublin card. I think I saw an Italian card announced the other day as well.
Yeah, so
What
this
can we look
Saturday,
forward to? What can we
London.
look forward to throughout the next few months as we head towards the end of the year?
Yeah, this Saturday, London. Um, then we have a nice little summer break. September, we come back with Dublin and Newcastle, a nice little double header. And then from there, immediately onto Italy. For what I understand, it's going to be a pretty big card. I don't think anything has been kind of officially announced yet, but I believe they're looking at Dario Belandi middleweight title fight is going to be on that card, and all the Cage Warriors Italian fighters are going to want to get out. Obviously, it'll be the last time in the year. After that, nothing's been announced, but if you look at the loop that we've done already this year, it's going to be a similar kind of thing. So I'll be looking for the same sort of venues in the same kind of order to finish out the year. So I think at the moment we're looking at 2 shows in November and 1 in December to finish things off, and that'll be us for 2025. But I believe dates for those and exact locations will be announced probably September time. So just keep an eye on the Cage Warriors socials, and that's where all your info will be.
Of course. And yeah, been a pleasure to speak today, Brad. I always finish by asking a fighter to give the hard sell. What can the people expect? So give us the hard sell. Why should people tune in this Saturday? Cage Warriors 192, Indigo, UFC Fight Pass, all that good stuff.
Because it's too hot to go outside, so why not stay in and watch UFC Fight Pass? No, there's much more to it than that, obviously. Look, I think if you're a fan of mixed martial arts, there's a bunch of established names on this card. If you're a fan of European MMA, you're going to know your Shad Chaks, you're going to know your Cameron Elses, you're going to know your Shearzads, you're going to know your Giovanni Scotts. But then looking down the card, there's a bunch of guys. You mentioned a few guys like your Ollie Sawas, up and coming dudes who you are going to want to be able to say, I was on that bandwagon since this guy was 4-0, 5-0, because that's the only reason we're MMA fans, right? We just want to be that guy who was like, yeah, well, I knew him before he was famous. The ultimate hipster sport. But yeah, you're going to see a load of that this Saturday night. I'm predicting big knockouts because let's be honest, who wants to fight 15 minutes in this heat? Everyone's going to want to be getting their opponents out of their early doors. And yeah, I just think with the guys on the card, there's potential for some crazy finishes. And there's going to be a nice break after this. So get your last Cage Warriors fix in this Saturday at the O2 UFC Fight Pass. Tickets from cagewarriors.com.
Perfect. You mentioned a lot of big knockouts there. How many times are we going to get the unbelievable call?
As long as my voice lasts in that humidity, it does get a bit to drink a lot of water to stop it from getting crispy. But as long as I can do it, I shall blast them out, my friend.
Of course, I won't make you talk anymore. Then that'll do it. Of course, yeah. Like Indigo is where this card goes down. Great venue. Been there several times. For Cage Warriors and for other things. Of course, UFC Fight Pass is where you can watch this at home. Flyweight title on the line. Shad Chak versus Giovanni Scott in the main event. Cameron Else, Sherzad Kadrian co-main event. Thanks for taking the time today, Brad. Enjoy
No
the
problem,
weekend, my
man.
friend.
Anytime.